Hello, time for another Man in Great book review. Today's book is Why Shakespeare Was Shakespeare by Stanley Wells, published by Amazon in 2014. It's 58 pages. One of the oldest conspiracy theories around is the Shakespeare authorship conspiracy, which basically said that William Shakespeare did not write his plays. The plays that were promoted by him or said to be by him were actually written by someone else. Either he passed them off as his own or some aristocrat who didn't want anybody to know that he was writing them got Shakespeare to write them in his name. This is a theory that nobody actually said this during Shakespeare's lifetime or any time close to Shakespeare's lifetime. This theory first got going in the mid-19th century. There was kind of an eccentric American woman who published a book claiming that Francis Bacon wrote the plays and that Shakespeare was supposedly written. Francis Bacon, a very prominent intellectual in London at the time, was an important philosopher, government bureaucrat, poet. Anyway, it was in the early 20th century that the Shakespeare conspiracy theory really kind of got traction. One of the more prominent people to propose this theory, one of these theories, is the British actor Derek Jacobi, who's a great actor. But it's a fringe idea. The vast majority of Shakespeare scholars believe that Shakespeare wrote his own plays. And the author here, Stanley Wells, is a prominent Shakespeare historian and expert, and he wrote this short book to defend the idea that Shakespeare wrote his own plays and to dismiss the conspiracy theories. Now, basically, there's two types of playwrights. One type are people that are involved in the theater. They're actors, they're producers, they're directors, and then they go on to write plays. Shakespeare was one of these. Also, Eugene O'Neill, August Wilson, various other people have done this. And the other kind of playwright is someone who's outside the theater, a novelist, a poet, some kind of writer who decides they want to write a play. Ben Jonson, who was a contemporary of Shakespeare, wrote a number of plays. He was primarily a poet, but he wrote a number of plays, some of which were very successful. T.S. Eliot, the poet, the American poet, wrote a number of plays that were also verse plays that were also very well regarded. Sometimes you have novelists who write screenplays or theatrical play versions based on their novels. One of the more successful of those was Herman Wouk, whose novel, The Caine Mutiny. He adapted parts of that novel for a play called The Caine Mutiny Court Martial, which was a big hit on Broadway. So, two basic approaches. You either become a playwright because you're involved in the theater, or you're a writer and you want to try your hand at writing plays. And usually, the most successful of these are the people that come out of the theater, because writing plays is different than writing novels or short stories or poems, because you're doing it in front of an audience. There's certain technical things you have to be aware of. You can't have too many people on stage at one time where they get in each other's way and block the view of the audience. You have to have scenes that build to some kind of conclusion before you have a scene break. You don't want to have too many scene changes because it's too difficult for the crew members to move props around. There's all kinds of technical things that go into putting on a play. And if you grow up in the theater, if you're an actor or a producer or whatever, you're aware of those things. And that's why I think that the people that are from the acting profession do a better job at writing plays than people that are coming from it from outside, because they know how to structure scenes, they know how to build things, they know all the technical aspects because they're in the theater. And so Shakespeare was an actor. He was a very successful actor. This book, well, let me back up a little bit. The first part of this book gives a short biography of what we know about Shakespeare, and we don't know a whole lot. There aren't a whole lot of documents about him, but there's probably more than there are for a lot of people that were in the Elizabethan period. He was born in the small town of Stratford-upon-Avon, about a 2 days horseback ride from London. He came from what we today call kind of a lower middle class family. He wasn't a peasant. He wasn't rich. He married when he was 18. At some point, he left Stratford and went to London and became an actor and became very successful. Eventually, he became part of what a company called the King's Men, which was the most prominent acting company in all of Britain. And he became quite wealthy. He bought the second largest house in Stratford. He bought a large plot of land. He bought another house. So he was becoming kind of a real estate developer, a real estate tycoon in his life. And of course, he wrote all these plays. Okay, so the argument that people have for dismissing Shakespeare and saying that he didn't actually write the plays is that he didn't go to university. He didn't have a university degree. We don't even know if he went to grade school. I mean, it's assumed that he did. The records we have, there was a kind of a grade school in Stratford, but we don't have any records of anyone going there until 1800. So there's no proof that he went there, but most people know about Shakespeare assume that he did go to school because of his social class standing. And they taught Latin, and they studied Latin classics like Ovid's Metamorphoses and probably some other prominent Latin and Greek books. And so the author argues that Shakespeare's grade school training, he learned all these myths and the basic stories, and so he knew that. And there had been English translations of the Metamorphoses and Boccaccio's Decameron, which is the basis of some of Shakespeare's plays. All these books have been translated into English, and so Shakespeare had access to them, reading them and so forth. And so he argues that even though Shakespeare didn't go to college, he probably knew enough about these myths and legends and so forth to be able to write plays about them. And there were other playwrights from similar backgrounds who were writing plays as well. The other big evidence about Shakespeare being the author is that during his lifetime and shortly after then, there were a number of other people, other writers who mentioned Shakespeare and mentioned what a great poet he was. Now, during most of his lifetime, Shakespeare was known more as a poet than a playwright. He wrote 2 long narrative poems and then a collection of sonnets, all of which were highly regarded. And so he was known as a great poet during his lifetime, and he's referred to as a poet by a number of these other people. Now, one of the things the conspiracy theories say is that the Shakespeare that's mentioned in all these accounts was a different person than the Shakespeare from Stratford, that they must be 2 different people. They could be the same one. And this book makes a claim that that's really absurd. You know, how could you have 2 William Shakespeares, one of whom was a nobody who was an actor, and the other one happened to write plays? So he basically dismisses all that. And in the last part of the book, he lists some of the people that have been claimed to be the true authors and shows how they couldn't be. Christopher Marlowe, for example, died years before most of Shakespeare's plays were written, so how could he have been the author? Francis Bacon never wrote a play, as far as anybody knows. He was busy with his career as a government official, and when he had spare time, he would write essays and do scientific experiments. So how on earth would he have time to write plays and so forth? So it's like that. So it basically comes down to the idea that people who argue that Shakespeare didn't write his plays don't really know what they're talking about. They don't really. He kind of dismisses the research they've done because they make a number of major mistakes. And he points out the fact that nobody during Shakespeare's time ever questioned the fact that he was a great writer. Then again, the first folio, the first collection of Shakespeare's plays that were published several years after his death, was put together by 2 of his fellow actors in The King's Men. Why would they have said that Shakespeare wrote them if he didn't? After he was dead, what difference would it make? Why would there be a conspiracy after his death? So it's an interesting short little book, and I'm one of those people that's never taken the Shakespeare controversy very seriously. Like most conspiracy theories, it's based on ignorance and kind of suspicion of authority and experts. There's always one thing that all conspiracy theories have in common is distrust of experts, distrust of intellectuals. A lot of conspiracy theorists are anti-intellectuals, and that really makes a case for this. So, if you're interested in the Shakespeare question, if you're a fan of Shakespeare, it's a very short book. You can read it easily in an hour and a half, and it's very well written. It's not technical, very easy to understand, and it kind of lays out the case for why Shakespeare wrote his own plays. The book is Why Shakespeare Was Shakespeare. The author is Stanley Wells. This has been another Man in Great Book Review. Thanks for watching.